Patrick Deale is a Labour lawyer. He joins us now. Patrick, good afternoon to you. I mean, it seems the strike is going ahead, due to happen tomorrow. Is there really anything that could stop it at this late stage? Could negotiations still happen?
I think the only thing that can stop it is some kind of give from government on the wage deal that's on the table. And I think that as things stand, the government seems to be pretty fixed on the 3%. Not only from a macroeconomic point of view, but also from the point of view that they've already agreed it and they've got a deal with SADTU. And that part of it has been put to bed, which of course is one of the COSATU unions. And so there's a bit of a divided house between them. And I think it'll be difficult for the government to make a different deal with other unions that it didn't do with SADTU. That's the one issue, which I think is pretty firm on. But perhaps the wriggle room is on this monthly cash gratuity, which at the moment is 1,000 rand and it's adjustable in different pay levels. But that expires at the end of March 2023. So that offers some sort of rational wriggle room for the state to talk to the other unions about and perhaps extend it or do something with that element of the offer that's on the table right now.
The SADTU issue is so curious because SADTU, the South African Democratic Teachers Union, I mean, if you want to put pressure on the state, you probably need nurses and teachers with you because that's the real face of service delivery for so many millions of people. And yet SADTU has accepted a wage offer of just 3%. If I remember correctly, their General Secretary is still Magwena Maluleke, who used to be, I don't know if he still is, the chief negotiator for the COSATU-aligned unions. I mean, they're sending quite a strong signal by accepting this, such a small increase.
It's a very strong signal, Stephen. I mean, I agree with you. And, you know, there comes a moment with these things when I think unions just take a view on the reality of the situation. And I think in SADTU's case, I don't know for sure, but the hints that I've got is that they were definitely persuaded, well, not definitely, I think they were persuaded by issues of public opinion around going on strike when all of these children are writing their matrics and other exams, and how that would present the union as uncaring and unselfish to the public with their parents, is particularly that so many of the teachers and civil servants who are members of SADTU have got their own children in school and so on, maybe personally affected. So I think public opinion and reputational damage by going on strike at this time of the year in the teaching zone, I think probably outweighed any kind of other consideration in whether or not to accept the government's offer.
This is difficult to assess, but certainly 10, 15 years ago, the big public servant strikes, Zwelinzima Vavi, General Secretary of COSATU as he then was, leading strikes in Tshwane, these were big events, and the public was very often behind the workers. That doesn't seem to be the case now. As I say, difficult to assess. I don't have polling data on how people feel about unions. Do you think public sentiment towards public sector unions has changed?
Definitely, I think it's changed. I mean, it's a kind of a context between macroeconomics, macro-social issues, and more microeconomics, micro-workplace issues, on an individual basis, a little bit higher added unions. And I think that the difference between 10 or 15 years ago and today is that the macroeconomics is radically different, but notably amongst the unemployed. There's so many more unemployed people who would love to have the jobs. And when they see this kind of activity going on with public service for people who are in jobs and who have got salaries and who have kind of relative security of employment compared with themselves, the level of sympathy for them in supporting their cause for more money and better benefits, I think is much more muted than it was 10 or 15 years ago.
Do you think that's why government is pushing 3% and why it's not going higher than that? I mean, it seemed to me to be quite a provocative, maybe aggressive move for government to actually put into the medium-term budget policy statement. Enoch Godongwana didn't sort of pencil in an increase of 3%. He took out his pen, didn't use lead, he took out his pen and he actually wrote it in ink and said 3%. Doof, there's my budget. I mean, that's quite an aggressive thing to do.
It was aggressive. And, I think, the ink may not be entirely dry, if to use the analogy. There may be some sort of smudge available on this gratuity, but certainly the message is strong. They've taken a stand, and they're going to stand by the stand, and that stand is the 3%. I don't think they're going to budge on that, and that is the message. And it comes at a point in wage negotiations, in a lot of wage negotiations, where deadlock is deadlock, and you cannot agree. And it's legitimate for an employer under those circumstances to proceed with its increase, its offer, so long as it has complied with all procedures and that the negotiations have simply been exhausted. And any further negotiations would become dysfunctional, quite frankly, and serve no purpose. Now, at that point, an employer can take unilateral action, and I think that's the view that the employer, or the government as employer, has taken in this instance, with all of the macro issues, the social problems, people under financial pressure in such a big way. They've made the move. They're going to stand by it, by all accounts, and they're not going to move on it. And so the message is absolutely clear. And I think that's why, if I may say, that the COSATU unions haven't rushed in to get strike certificates as fast as the PSA has gone, for example. The PSA has already got a strike certificate. The COSATU unions have hesitated a bit and are still talking about talks as they should be, quite frankly, but they seem a little bit reluctant to do it. And the reason is, Stephen, is that to manage a strike of this magnitude, of 6 different unions, each, were collectively having about nearly 1 million members, and trying to run and operate a strike, the logistics of trying to manage it, trying to manage emotions when people start not getting paid, in different settings, in ports, in hospitals, all over in different workplaces, is almost an impossible task and highly, highly risky for unions to take it on. Even more so if they're divided amongst themselves, whether they have got the willpower to face off with the government indefinitely, which they probably don't, because their members will probably get tired and exhausted, and they're probably saying, listen, I've had enough of this. Let's go back, let's accept, let's get back to normal, let's keep what we have.
So then, the Public Servants Association, their strike action due to start tomorrow. The question, of course, becomes what impact does it have? And from what you say, without the COSATU unions, would that mean that it actually won't have much of an impact? So the PSA goes on strike and actually doesn't have the sort of full impact that it wants. So it's weaker as well. Would that be right?
I think that's right, because, the leadership is talking up the rhetoric of strike, the rhetoric of power. COSATU even talks about war. We're at war with the employers. The PSA is traditionally a less sort of militantly positioned union than the COSATU unions, who are overtly militant. And that's all sort of strong, heavy language in the leadership. Whether the ordinary members, who go to offices, who go and work on the railways, who go, work on the ports, are going to follow through with that and buy into it and take to the picket lines and be resolute and so on, is an entirely different thing. My sense is they don't have the degree of support amongst the rank and file members of their unions as they might have had, they certainly did have in the past. I certainly think it has got diluted, and the capacity to keep them motivated, to keep the willpower and the resolve to keep going, and that is from the leadership on their members. I think that they must know that that's risky, apart from the logistics of everything.
Patrick Deale, thank you very much indeed. Good to talk again. Labour lawyer, really appreciate the analysis and the information coming through from that. So that strike due by the Public Servants Association to start tomorrow.